Today's program needs no introduction. I was talking with him about, what I was going to say. What do you say about Chris Albert? And I go, hey, he needs no introduction, especially here. So at this point, we give you our presenter, a man that sometimes goes by Chico, and is Mr. Chris Albert.
Well, after 4 years, I guess it's my turn working with this organization, which is so good because they tell they turn the stories into fact and things like that. But to start off, I was born in California, a little town called Pomona, California, where Tom Waits was from. In fact, he was in the other high school, Pomona High School. I went to Ganesha High School. And also running around that time was Frank Zappa, who used to play in the clubs around there. And little story, I got the chance to hear him playing in a club. We used to sneak around and watch the guys in the club because we were all in elementary school. We didn't know what was going on. You're not hearing me? Okay. Well, in about 1956, my parents moved to Iowa after California. My father had been run over by a train, literally, and he got some money out of that and decided to move back to Iowa, where he was from, and bought a farm. So he packed us all up and we went there. Don't understand, but that's where we ended in Iowa. And that's where I started school and started singing. Most of my singing, I love to sing. That's my whole persona is I'm a vocalist. I was a vocalist major at SMS. And I got pretty much that from my mother. She used to sing at the house and all over the house, and she sang in church and did all those things. And she was also princess in the Rose Parade in 1948, and then married my father, and then they had me in 49. So that was a short stint, about 3, 4, 5 years, and then my dad decided to move back to California. Sometimes I felt like an army brat because we moved so many times. And we moved back to California, and I started going to parochial school, and I was raised in the church. Went there every Sunday. My dad made sure we went there every Sunday, so I sang in the choir, so I didn't have to sit out in the pews. I thought that was pretty good. And also was an altar boy, because that made sure that I didn't have to sit in the pews and listen to it. So I started doing that, and then my father bought me a guitar, Les Paul Jr., which today is worth lots of money, but I didn't know that, but I learned how to play guitar and piano. They got my sister a piano and bought me the guitar, so I started taking lessons. But I didn't really like lead guitar player. I liked the rhythm part of it. I always was a rhythm player because I always wanted to sing, and I felt that the guitar was the way to back me up so I could sing. It made me free. I didn't have to drag a piano around, so that was nice. So I got into folk music. When we moved back to California, it was 59, and folk music was the thing, especially in California. And I started a group with my sister called Two Jacks and a Jill, and we started playing and singing in hootenannies, which was the big deal. Where we lived, we were, I'd say, half a mile from two colleges. There was Mount Sac and Cal Poly, and there was hootenannies going there all the time. And all the schools, the high schools, had hootenannies because it was great. You could not have any chairs. Everybody sat on the floor, and I listened to people like Kingston Trio, Phil Oakes, Tim Hardin. I saw him one time on The Tonight Show, and I just went, man, that's what I want to do. And so I started doing folk music in junior high school and played and did things like that. I also used to sneak into the movies and watch the teen rock movies. And my dad hated those, and didn't like me doing that. But I'd go in and saw, I don't know if you ever remember the Peppermint Twist and things like that, and that was the teen movie, and Asphalt Jungle with Glenn Ford, and even the one I just saw Jimmy Dean was on, or not Jimmy Dean, but James Dean just did that movie. So I watched those, and I started playing, listening to the Beatles and listening to the Beach Boys and the Stones and the soul music and all the English groups. And back then, radio was not segregated. And the only way I can say that is you had all types of music. You turn on the radio, you go from Aretha Franklin to the Beach Boys, and turn around and they do some Beatles songs, and there'd be some San Francisco groups. So it was all just Maine, and you got a good AM station, and that's what you listened to. Eventually it went to FM, but in the early years it was all AM music. Then I did singing in high school. I was part of a group called the Madrigals. It was kind of a select group of 12 girls and 12 guys, and we went around and we did shows all over Southern California at different events, including the Los Angeles County Fair, which was one of the biggest county fair in the country at that particular time. And as a typical kid, California, orange groves, walk home, you grab a pomegranate or something off a tree, and then you'd go out and pick orange groves and go out there and have wars with your friends, shooting BB guns at each other and things like that, and learn to fish and hunt and do all those normal things. Well, then my father decided to move to Ozark, Missouri from California, which at that time in the 60s, 64, Sunset Strip was cooking. Things were really happening, and I was playing in Battle of the Bands and stuff, and I went, why are we going to Missouri? I had no idea. So we went there and showed up, and I was in Ozark, went to school my senior year. Oh yeah, it was my senior year. So that was kind of a shock, and took me a little bit to adjust, but I also lived in Iowa, so I understood what it was in a small town to go fishing and hunting and drive around the square, which I did. And the neat thing about Ozark, and I slowly discovered what really was going on, and every Saturday night on the square there was this dilapidated building, and we were driving around and I'd hear this music and I'd go, what is that? And, oh, you don't want to go there. That's just a bunch of old hillbillies playing music. And I said, well, let's stop. So we stopped and I went in there, and there was a gentleman playing bass, stand-up bass, a black man, which I thought, whoa. And guitars, fiddle players, and they were dancing and stomping on that floor. And it was really insightful, and I finally started going, wow, this is something different. This is the true folk thing that I was being a part of and seeing. And then a friend of mine, Larry Davis, said, come on, we're going up to Springfield. And he took us up to a place, because friends came from California and said, where can we go? And he said, go to this place on North National. And that's where I ran into Jimmy Cotton Jim and the Essex Four. And also Willie Richardson was playing. They had 3 stages, 2 against the walls and 1 like that, and the bands played for an hour and rotated. And that was the first really R&B. I mean, I listened to soul music. On the radio, it was called soul music. It really wasn't rhythm and blues. And that was the first time I heard that music. And my friends, we were all just going crazy because we went, wow, this is the actual stuff. This is what's going on. So I realized that this town had a lot going for it. There was more going on here than in California, if you messed around, cops nail you pretty fast. In the Ozarks, it was pretty wide open as far as I was concerned. It was really a lot of fun. So I started hanging out and seeing what was going on. I'd come up here, and I was going to Half a Hill. Now, people told about Half a Hill, and that was neat because there was these bands playing. It's the first time I saw the Lavender Hill Mob, and they were playing there. And next thing I know, I said, well, what's going on? Well, then I started going to church at Redeemer Lutheran Church, which had an association with Trinity. And I met a gentleman named Paul Vietz. His brother's here, but Paul Vietz was learning how to play, and we decided to put a band together. And me and him and David Craig, Larry Harbottle put a band, and we called it the Dewsbury Road Crew, which was the name we got from the Magical Mystery Tour album and movie. And that Dewsbury Road was where the Beatles did their Magical Mystery Tour. And we were fanatics about Beatles. We were playing that and doing cover tunes. That's where I met Dale McCoy and The Bubble, because they used to come over to this basement where Paul and Doug's mom lived with her dad, and we practiced down in the basement, which was there on Kimbrough and Portland Street. So we played, and next thing I know, the Bubble said, hey, if you want jobs, you got to go to Fantasy Productions, I think that's the name of it was, where Bob Philibert had this company where he booked. And then he said, well, if you want to play in this town, you got to join the union. And so I joined the Musicians Union, 150, and then started going to meetings at Half a Hill. And we started playing around, and he'd get gigs. Of course, we were the bottom band, so we got all the, we didn't get the good frat jobs and stuff like this. But that was my first introduction to actually the music business as a business and agents and stuff. We didn't have that in California. Generally, you got a gig through the high school or something like that. So I went to Ozark, and like I said, I met all these people. And I played around Branson. In fact, we played all over this area. But I played in Branson before Branson was Branson. There was 2 theaters. I think the Presley's really wasn't there, but I know the Ball Numbers was. And there was this little tin siding little club that was off 76, and you drove down this road into there. And it was a little club, and we played down there. And then I played around in little places here and there. One time I played in a milk barn out in West Plains, and we just did all these gigs. And the neat thing was there was a lot of jobs. You could go to these little teen towns all over the Ozarks. They had one in Bolivar. They had one in Marshfield. They had one in Republic. They had them all over the place. And a little band, you can make some pretty good money just playing teen town. And that was kind of the neat thing. And that was one of the reasons I really started enjoying this place. And then I ran into Michael Bungie and met him. And he had just got in from the war, or San Francisco, and he started turning everybody on, the Sons of Champlin and the blues and R&B and stuff like this. And they had a little shop called it was Ananda Leather, and that's when I first started finding out what was really going on in the world as far as music. And he opened that up for me, and I started hanging out with those guys. And then I met a gentleman named Rex Meredith, who was a guitar player, and I met him out at Zenith. Everyone worked at Zenith. My father was a big deal out there, and I worked out there in Zenith. But I met Rex, and he sold me that 335 I got a picture of there, and I started hanging out with him. Well, one night he said, why don't you come into the executive lounge, and you can hear my little trio. And he was playing with Don Clements, Dave Pease, and Rex Meredith playing. Well, Don didn't want me in there because I was just 20. I was about to turn 21, and he said, well, if he sits over there and stays quiet, we'll let him sit there in the corner, because I wanted to hear this music that they were playing. It was a cross between lounge and a little bit of jazz and stuff. Well, then in walks Wayne Carson. He had just got in from Nashville, just got in from the road, and he goes, what are you guys doing? I said, well, I don't know, we're just about done. So they got done. Don didn't want to go, but he says, come on across the street. We got the studio over there. So I went over there, and that's when I met Wayne and sat there at the board and learned to like whiskey. And these guys, a piano player came in, and I think the piano player was, who was the guy that No. This was the gentleman who went big time with Don Imus. Charlie McCord was there. He had just arrived. And next thing I know, they're going, let's get out the stuff and let's start playing. And Bobby Threadgill walks in. And next thing I know, these guys are playing jazz till 4 in the morning. It was some of the best music I'd heard in a long time. And I'm going, man, I'm in Missouri and I'm hearing this stuff. And it was Dave Pease, Bobby Threadgill, and Rex Meredith, and they were just having a ball. And we were sitting there till 4 in the morning. And I remember Cy came in and goes, and we were just, the sun was coming up, so we were there, and he goes, Wayne, you're a millionaire. And he goes, what do you mean I'm a millionaire? He said, your song just went top dog with Joe Cocker, and you're certified. Oh, okay, let's open up another bottle and start drinking. And that was my introduction to that whole scene and Cy and stuff, and to that studio, because that studio was the next best thing. Because then I eventually started a band. I met Soup and Michael Granda at SMS. And we were basically, well, before that, we were doing concerts out in the park. Paul Vietz and I started going out to Lake Springfield and playing. We thought that was neat. Because eventually what happened was we went up to St. Louis, and just to hang out with a bunch of guys, we bought catnip to smoke, because that's all we knew what to do. And got headaches from it. But then we went a Sunday afternoon, we went to Forest Park. We heard that's the place to go. And we heard this band called Rush. It wasn't the Rush that everybody knows. This was a band guy's name was Gene. I can't think of his name, but he eventually played at the Finley River Festival. But we heard these bands in the park and went, wow, what a neat thing to do. So when we came back here, we said, well, let's start doing that. We went out to Lake Springfield and started doing bands out there. And there was a group from Columbia. I can't think of their name right off the top of my head. Sound Farm. And I think somebody had come up to me and said, hey, man, can these guys play? And I said, oh, sure, we'll let her use and so they started playing. Next thing you know, we got hippies had finally come to Springfield. And we went, wow, this is pretty neat. So eventually we started playing in parks and doing things like that, and I started getting into the production end of it. And eventually the first show that I ever did was the Finley River Festival. Now, there was a lot going on there, and I was kind of like the front guy, the promoter, but I got to give credits to Bill Van Eaton and Billy Frisella and Sam Bezaderic. If it wasn't for those guys and Dr. Love, we'd never gotten that thing off the ground. They were the money behind it. They helped get it. Through Bob Philibert and myself, we put together the groups and got this going. Kurt Hargis, if it hadn't been for him being there that day to build that stage, the whole thing would have been probably a disaster for sure. But it all came by hook or by crook and wiring enough, and we put that thing on, and it became quite the festival. And I credit it with actually making the change from the bands that all played here were all in suits and all dressed alike, and they were all doing that. And eventually it got into pretty much the hippie type thing and the festival deal, and it was quite an experience. So that was my first major show, and that kind of got me going. And like I say, I'm a producer, and I do shows, and I did a Homegrown Reunion at the Landers. That was quite a show with Granny's Bathwater, and that was the first Family Tree played there. And we had the Hang Dog with Twiggy and stuff, and we kind of took over the theater. I remember the first night there was so much smoke that you couldn't see. And the next night the fire department came and had posted people, so you can't smoke in the theater anymore. So that was quite the adventure there. That was the first rock show for the Landers Theater. Then I did several other shows called Red Hot Summer in Branson. I did Wild West Days down on the square, where we had about 10, 15 bands for that. And then not the last show. Last show I ever did was Lloyd Hicks. But before that, I did a show with Wayne Carson. And this was probably one of Wayne's last shows. We did it out the Oasis out there with I can't think of the people, but there was other band. Oh, the Skeletons played. That's who it was. Yeah, the Skeletons played, and we had another gentleman play, another band. He was a country band, but that was neat to see Wayne. He did his last show there, and he used the Skeletons as a backup, and it was quite the show. Were you there for that? And so those are all the concerts that I had done. I'm kind of skipping around. Now, going back to Springfield, I ran into Soup. I met Soup, and we put together a band called the Great Sloth. And we were actually the first probably San Francisco type band, because we did everything from Jefferson Airplane to Quicksilver, Buffalo Springfield. Everybody else was kind of doing an R&B soul type deal, rockin' type thing, but we decided that we were going to be the hippie band, and we all had hair down here, and we played all over from Nevada. I used to call it Highway 71 circuit, because you played Nevada, El Dorado Springs, and you played all these little Lamar and places like that, all the way down to Joplin, and then coming over this. So we the Great Sloth was, we had our old van. I had a 49 GMC van that I bought from Jimmy Cotton Gym, and that was our deal. So Soup and I, we played together for about 2 or 3 years, living on a farm out here east that Ronnie keeps calling Stony Acres. And I had a little festival out there with Big Brother and the Holding Company. Well, it wasn't Big Brother and the Holding Company. They advertised as Big Brother and the Holding Company, but it wasn't Big Brother and the Holding Company. And eventually that's where I met Benny Mahan. He had come out there with Bungie, Lloyd Hicks, Dave Pease, and Benny. They played for a KA party. And these guys got so drunk they were jumping over the fire pit and falling into it. And Bungie was just rolling on the ground. It had rained, it was muddy, and eventually they came into the house, and that's how I met Benny, and he turned me on to poke. Anybody know what poke salad is? Yeah. And he said, here, you can live off of this. You can actually live off of this. So that's when I first met Benny. Then I introduced him to my sister, and that was the last I saw of him. As most gentlemen would know, my sister was pretty popular with a lot of the bands. And she was a gorgeous woman, and she was pretty vivacious and really smart. So they were pretty good. And so then after the Great Sloth, we kind of broke. I went to California to just as a trip, played at the Ice House in Pasadena, and did my stuff there, and then came back, and I was with John Mitchell, went out there with me, and we decided that we were going to put together a kind of a folk rock band, because that's when Buffalo Springfield and all, and we kind of liked that music. So we came back and we started getting people to do it. And I had met Sherry Peters through Soup and them, and she had never really played in a band, but boy, she could sing. She could sing like Gracie Slick. I mean, this girl could, and she could prance and play. And I said, well, we're putting a band together. What do you think? And she played keyboards, and she said, sure, I'll try it. Well, then I met Stevie Richardson, and he was a bass player, and he liked what we were going to do. And then I said, well, we need another guitar player, and he brings Randy Chowning to meet and put this thing together. And we started practicing down at the warehouse, and we called her name Shorty Dunn. I have no idea why that name, but it was the name we came up with. And we started playing around town, and next thing you know, the band was really, really good. 3-part harmonies, and we did everything Buffalo Springfield. We did a lot of, she could sing like Gracie Slick, so we did Jefferson Airplane and plus a few other tunes, and we liked the Moody Blues, and we were mostly kind of cover. I hadn't quite started writing songs at that particular time, and so that band lasted until around 72, 73. And that's when I had nothing to do and decided to run for sheriff. Gary Edgars had came up to me and says, everybody knows you. You've done this and done that. Why don't you run for sheriff? And I went, I don't know about that. And I said, well, I got nothing else to do. I was living in a house on Grand Street with Mike Maples and Zachary Bowe. And I kind of met some guys from St. Louis, and we had a band called Chameleon, but it really wasn't solid enough. And I said, okay. So I put my name in the hat and ran for sheriff. And don't know, it was quite fun because I became really good friends with Mickey Owen. And that's when I wrote the song 40 Acres. And if anybody knows what that song's about, it's about marijuana. And he liked that song. And every time we did a rally, like a Democratic deal, I remember at Doling Park, he says, well, here's a guy that's written a song about pot, and it's a pretty good song, and introduced me, and he said, he got it. So I got up there and I played it, and he put $10 in the kitty there. He thought that was pretty good. I remember one time he had me and another friend in the car, and he was going, you know what? He said, I don't care if you smoke. I know you guys drink, and that's back when you could go to the river and drink a case of beer and cops would leave you alone, sheriff wouldn't bother you and stuff. He says, but you stay away from that heroin. You do that, I'm coming after you with everything I got. He said, I don't care if you smoke a little pot, that's fine, And Mickey was a pretty good old boy. I mean, he was a good old boy, and he ran a pretty good, no offense to, I know he treated Joe kind of bad during the festival, but if it hadn't been for him, I think it would have been worse than what it was. Mickey kind of kept everything tight and right, and I appreciate that for him. He was a good soul, and a pretty good ball player too. But that's Shorty done, and then I went sheriff. Well, then I also had much to do, so I opened up a head shop. Well, it was more or less it was a shop. I had a lot of artwork in there, did comic books and stuff, and it was right next door to the first Munchies there on Jefferson Street, right across from KTTS. Well, I used to play my guitar there in the window just to be playing and stuff, and this DJ walks in. He had cowboy hat and boots, and he just had a sandwich. He came in there to look at the shop, and he goes, can you play that thing? I said, well, yeah, I can play it. So I played it. He says, can you write any songs? I said, well, yeah, I guess. He said, oh, okay, you write a song and I'll be back in about 20 minutes. I said, okay. So I had this tune I was kind of doing, and it was an A minor CG, and the song was Jefferson Road. I wrote it about Jefferson, and if you listen to the song, everything in the song is what happened. I was sitting out the window observing. There was a gentleman walking down the steps of the YMCA, and I put White Blind Man in there, and it was the gentleman who did the massages there. Never knew that till I was introduced to him. He was brought here for Music Monday, and he was a piano player. And Larry, and he was part of that song. There was a lady in a plastic blue car of blue, which was a Corvette. She'd parked right in front. And there was also where there was a professor from SMS who was trying to change downtown. Downtown was dead. There was only my head shop, and there was a leather shop, and there's a little area here, and the Y, and Philibert opened up a music store right down from up from Lyons, and we kind of had this little hippie community right there, and Victor was doing his cooking, and it was kind of a nice little place. And he wanted to get rid of all the one-armed bandits. What do you call them? The parking meters. And he wanted to cut them off. So I put that in the song, drop a coin in, it's time you leave and stuff. So I wrote this whole song about Jefferson Road and called it Jefferson Road. And at that particular time, I was thinking about leaving town because the Daredevils had just released their album. And all of a sudden, I realized music was going to change. The outlaw thing was coming along, Willie and Waylon and all that stuff. And Willie had just released Redheaded Stranger. And he did it in a studio in Garland, Texas, because he was tired of Nashville. He said, this isn't for me. First of all, they wouldn't let him do an album. Well, he did one album, but they didn't let him do it the way he wanted to do it. So Ray Price had a studio in Garland, Texas, and Willie headed for there. Well, I was about ready to leave because I realized that I didn't know where the scene was going to go. It was pretty much Daredevil land, and everybody else was kind of disappearing and moving and leaving too. And what I decided was, well, I'm going to make it in this business. I can't do it here, so I'm going to go to Austin. And I had been going to Austin for the last 4 or 5 years, going down there and hanging out with some friends out at Hippie Hollow out there. It was out at Lake Travis. And right down the road was Michael Murphy and Hoyt Axton and those guys. There was a house down there to hang in. And Austin scene was what I wanted to be in. You had the Armadillo World headquarters. You had the gas station where they discovered numerous artists. And everybody was writing, and I thought, well, I'm going to go down there and be influential and get into that thing because it was an area where you could write your music and everybody liked it and stuff. So I packed my bags and left in '76 and decided to go down there. But I made a short stop in Dallas because I had friends in Dallas. There was a family down there named the Halls. And the Rex Hall and his brother and Marcia Hall and Karen Hall. Well, I had met them in Ozark. If anybody remembers Ozark, that big curve that goes around, well, there was a big house on that curve by the Finley River. And the lady that lived there, she was a musician and taught piano. And I got introduced to her, and we sat down, and she kind of mentored me a little bit through piano and stuff. And she actually helped me get into SMS as a music major and knew Mr. Lyons, who was the head of the marching band and things like that. So she's the one who talked me into doing that, and she helped me. I had taken district and state through my vocals, and she had helped me rehearse and things like that. I got a 2 at state. I got a 1 for district. But and so I knew the family, so I stopped in there. The next thing I know, I meet this woman who ended up being my wife and having a child, and so I stayed in Dallas. The difference between Dallas and Austin was where you went to play and have fun. Dallas was all business. I started reading, and I met a lady named Bobby McMillan, who was a pretty good singer, played up and down Greenville Avenue. And she kind of showed me some things, and I started hanging out with her. And with her, that's when I started getting into the music business. And she did too. And we both worked together, and she had she was a big influence on my life. She was also a music therapist, but she had majored in music. She played keyboards. Now, we never played in a band together, but she decided to start a record company. And she turned me onto this book. It's called This Business of Music. And she said, you need to read this. And that's where I started going to school and learning all about the music industry. I got my recording studio certificate. Dallas had just opened up and built television studios in each one of the community colleges. And if you went to those and you took their training, you were certified and you could work in those venues. We also started a thing called the Dallas Songwriters Association. And that's where I really started writing more songs and doing and recording and things like that. I went to a place called Poor David's Pub, and I won the contest there, and he took me under his wing. That was the neat thing about Dallas, was I saw every blues player in the world there. Everybody, from Muddy Waters to Lightning Hopkins to all the Kings, Albert King. In fact, one night I had a sound and lighting business, and I worked at Mother Blues, and I was in there late because something happened. And the guy goes, well, we're going to lock up. You want to go or stay? And I said, well, I don't know. He said, well, if you stay, we're going to lock the door, and we're going to do some jamming. Well, I said, okay. So I sat there, and Freddie King walks down the stairs with what's his name? Can't even think of his name. Stevie Ray Vaughan. And I sat there for 2 hours listening to those guys play. That was the neat thing about Dallas. It was amazing who you might run into. I ran into Ronnie Wood at an art show and had him sign these pictures. I hung out with so many different people. I worked with Delbert McClinton on a couple of shows. I did worked at the State Fair of Texas, where I worked with the Bellamy Brothers. Ran into that guy, Gary Pickett. They told me to go meet the bus at the gate. So I walked down there, and he opens the door. We both looked at each other and laughed because who'd we decide you were with? Southern Pacific. And I worked with Brenda Lee at the Coke deal. I worked with Rodney Crowell, and I worked with one of my, I never thought I'd ever meet him, Carl Perkins. I was the monitor man for Carl Perkins, and I got his autograph, and he said, great show. And that was great to see him play. And his two sons were with him, so they played. And that was the neat thing. Dallas was always known as a corporate town, but there's so much music going on there. And between that and Fort Worth, I remember when I first saw Delbert McClinton, we went over to Fort Worth, and this guy says, you got to hear this guy, you got to hear this guy. I walked in there, and this club was about that big. And there was a keyboard on the stage and a chair. And I'm going, what? And we're packed into this booth like this. And they say, okay. And Delbert McClinton walks out, and this guy plays piano, and he's playing harp. And that's the only two who was there. And it was just wonderful to hear this guy play. And then I watched his career grow, and soon you were seeing him up and down Greenville Avenue. Well, I also got into computers. And in Springfield, I went to Votech in 1968, if anybody remembers that. It is now OTC. But I started in computers, and I learned on the 1620 IBM machine, which was the old punch cards and the old file things and stuff. And I didn't do too well. I did a year there. My game was I like to fix things, and I like to know how things work. And I'm more of a tech person than I am software person. I'd rather tear it apart and fix it instead of worrying about the software. And I learned enough software, I mean, I've gone to school for that. But I got it, and it helped me later on in Dallas. I got into a company called Interdata, which was out of Monmouth, New Jersey. And they were building the first mainframes, which were about this big. And it took two guys to lift a 10 megabyte hard drive. Two guys, you had one guy on that side lift that into it. It was huge. It was Diablo. And platters were this big. Memory boards were like 15 by 15. But I learned a lot, learned how to fix them, learned how to troubleshoot them, and I learned a lot of ways how to troubleshoot. And eventually, PCs showed up. And the big computers went away, and everything was board swapping, and there was no room for guys like me. So I got a job at a sound company, and the next thing I know, I'm doing sound systems in topless bars, which...
Thank you for your service.
And that was quite an interesting time in my life. Because that's the time when topless bars changed from biker bars to gentlemen clubs. And these three guys, here's the real story was these three gentlemen who were vice president AT&T corporate guys. And they would go to these clubs. Well, there's three of them called MJR and Mike, Jim, and Robert. And they went into this club. It was owned, I can't think of the guy's name, but doesn't matter. They made a deal with this gentleman, sat it on the true story, napkin on the table, signed it, and they said the deal was he had to pay this guy $5,000 a week to keep the club. You could keep all the rest of the money. Well, these guys went in there, cleaned the club, threw everything out, and they hired this gentleman I worked for, sound company, Advanced Light and Sound. Well, this gentleman, he was into gay clubs. And at that time, gay clubs were, they had the flowery girls and all that stuff, and they had the discos and stuff, and they were thumping away. But he also got it. a lot of sound companies did not want to go into topless bars. They didn't want to deal with them because they had a reputation of bikers never paying, and it was a rough deal. Well, these guys came in and changed all that. They built chairs that you felt comfortable in. They took the light shows that they did at the disco clubs and put them on the stage, and they took these sound systems with these things called earthquakes, Serwin-Vaken earthquakes, Marquidome. We took 2 of them. We put 2 on one side, 2 on another side, and we had these PD-18 Serwin-Vegas, 4 of them on each side of the stage. I mean, it pounded. And we had like 4 BGW amplifiers and then QSCs and all these EQs and stuff. Well, that's how I learned the sound business. They threw me out there and said, go and learn it. And I learned, and I got taught by these guys. Well, eventually my boss was screwing me, wasn't paying me. And he'd go weeks, and he's driving a brand new Corvette and stuff. Well, come to find out he was running 2 sets of books. But that's beside the point. He wouldn't pay me. Well, I quit. And it was right before Christmas, and I just quit and decided I wasn't going to deal with it anymore. So I started my own business because I had built up a reputation of doing. And so I got a call from one of the clubs, Baby Dolls Topless, on Harry Hines. And I went in there, and the system was not working. It worked for 5 minutes, cool down, then it shut off. Well, these amplifiers had a little switch in there that if it overheated, they'd turn off. Well, I'm sitting there looking, and they'd called Advanced Light and Sound, my old boss, and he sent a guy over there, and he wasn't too hip because I was the one doing all the work. And I sat there and looked at them and realized they had amp racks that were this tall, and the amp racks had fan systems in there. So I went and I pulled the filter, and it was dirty. So I cleaned the filter, and it worked. And the guy goes, well, how would you like to have 15 nightclubs? Because those clubs, if they shut down for hour, 2 hours, they were averaging $15,000, $20,000 a week. And to lose, there was so many clubs, the guys would leave and go to the club across the street. So it was very important that you got this thing up and running. So he says, man, what took you so long? We've been waiting for you to make this change for a year. So they gave me the clubs, and then I ended up with 35 nightclubs in Dallas area, Dallas-Fort Worth area. I took care of them. I did all the work for them, sound and lighting. I took care of major discos. There was a place called Fast and Night that was run by the Winds, and that gentleman, he owned A1 Sound Company, which did Grateful Dead, every major, Paul McCartney, the Stones, everything. He was the guy who sponsored the Dallas Rock Festival, his sound system and everything. So I was in pretty good company, and I worked that for about 5-6 years until Dallas bottom dropped out, and it just dropped out hard and heavy. There was no work. You'd work a week, be off a week. You'd work 2 weeks, be off 2 weeks. There was no jobs. It was hard to find work. I had a ex who was a very mean person, and she did her best to destroy anything I had going, and I've lost my daughter because of it. But I decided, and my parents and a few people, we had the word was Branson, Missouri. And I had just got back from California working the Hotel Coronado. Now, if anybody knows what that place is, it's in San Diego, and it's where they filmed Some Like It Hot and a few other movies. It's where all the stars would go and hang out and take off for Tijuana, blow their minds, and then come back and stay at the Hotel Coronado. I met Tony Curtis, Debbie Reynolds, Glenn Ford. I worked with Donald O'Connor. It was the 3 weeks that we went out there, and we built all the staging, all the props, everything to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Hotel Del. It was a company that was built. Thomas Edison built the power plant back in when it first did early 1900s. It was on an island Hotel Coronado. Everything, the ceiling was done like this. Not one nail was in that ceiling. It was a huge room, as big as that room out there. And stayed there for 2 weeks. Wicker furniture, stuff on your pillow. I mean, it was just, if you look at that book there, you'll see what that place was like. And that was the last big deal that I did. I came back and I finally decided that I've got to leave. They offered me a job, so I had either California or Branson. And I knew if I went to California, I'd never see my daughter. So I said, well, I'm going to move to Branson or Springfield because I lived here and I established it and knew a lot of people up here. But I really came to work in Branson because the word was through the roadie. Dallas was roadie heaven. People who lived in Dallas, the big stars would come to Dallas. They'd rent a big warehouse. Paul McCartney, the Stones would grab the first two top Fairmont floors of the Fairmont and hang out there and take a Learjet to their concerts and then come back and stay in Dallas because there was protection there. It was kind of it had always been through the 30s and everything. It had these beautiful theaters there. It's where the money was there to support the arts of California. Oil money was the place. That's who did the movies. That's who financed all the big shows, Broadway and everything. Dallas was big money. I did several work in Highland Park, huge mansions, and I had learned that's the way it was. And they called it the Rainbow Connection because LA say they're going to do this production, and it was always rehearsed or done there in Dallas, Texas. And a lot of movies were shot there, a lot of commercials, big commercials, a lot of your radio commercials. There's a company called TM, Woody would know, where they had hundreds of tape machines and guys sitting in booths going, and doing all the commercials for all the radio stations. Dallas was the workhorse for the entertainment industry, and I'm glad I had a chance to work there. I learned so much about the music business, and like I said, I got into television. We had a thing called Texas Music Magazine and the Dallas Songwriters Association. But things got bad. It got really bad, and I decided to come to Branson and get out of that. And so I came to Branson first and landed in Springfield, and things hadn't really kicked that much in Branson. It was coming, but it really hadn't done the big deal. Shoji was there. I worked a couple weekends with him, and other than that, finding a job, I was still kind of soul searching. I moved back and started playing in Springfield. Somebody tried to talk me into doing Lindbergh's, and I did that, and then they stole that from me, and so I got away from there and decided I'm going to eventually end up moving down to Branson. But I started playing in a club called the Press Box, and I played with Larry Teeters and Mark Wilhoit, and we had a group called the Sahuno Brothers. And so who knows? And we packed the place. It was a new thing because in Texas I was playing this song list that has worked for me for probably 30, 40 years, and it's tunes it's a song from each genre or a few songs, and what I do is I take songs, like instead of doing all Eric Clapton, I'll pick two or three that really work, or I did Margaritaville, or I did Stand By Me, and I would mix those up, and that was the way it seemed to be the way the crowds liked it. In Dallas, I played a lot of clubs down in Dallas as a single and did a lot of restaurant bars, and so I did it up here, and it worked. We were packing them in with college kids. Well, after Wild West days and downtown kind of got its own feel and started building, I decided to, and Lindbergh's fell on its butt. I said, well, I'm tired of this. So I went, and Bruce Rader took me on this jaunt through the hills of the Ozarks, and we stopped in Reed Springs, and he showed me this place. He said, you need to get that place. So I think there was puppeteers behind there, but I rented this building for $400 a month with the help of people like George Smith, and then I met Jim Day, and I met a few of those people down there, Greg Becker and those folks, and they were all hippies that moved to this town. Well, they're actually arts crafts people, potterers, metal people. Lee Robertson was into doing metal, leather, or whatever you call it. And it was a hippie community. And they welcomed me, and I said, well, I'm going to open up a club. What kind of club? Well, a folk club, based on the old folk clubs that I had played in. And Dean Billingsley showed up one night with Robbie Getzendaner, and we set up our instruments and kind of jammed. And he said, this is kind of like a hideaway. And I said, yeah. I said, maybe we should call it Fernando's. No, he goes, oh, you know the song Hernando's Hideaway? I said, I don't like that. Let's just call it Fernando's. So we called it Fernando's Hideaway because it was stuck down there. It was on the main drag. Highway 13 went by. And at that time, there was no bypass or anything. And Chris remembers. And next thing I know, we're doing shows in there, BYOB, and people like Wes Wilson come out of the woodwork, and Michael Brewer, and these guys who I just met, and Brewer and Shipley. And next thing I know, people are coming there because it's such a laid-back deal. And they could bring their own drinks. Brewer loved it because he could have his rum and his drink here and mix it there, and nobody bothered him. And Wes loved it. He called it his church. Church of Blues, because we'd have all kinds of different artists. I mean, we had folk people in it. And eventually I had it for 4 years, built it up. I allowed artists to come in, and they did murals on the wall. And then Wes started doing posters. And as you can see, there's a couple posters there that he did. And I've got tons of posters that he did because he got back in. He said, you've put me back into the poster. And as you know, Wes Wilson did all the posters for the Grateful Dead, Quicksilver, Jefferson Airplane, for the Fillmore West. He was the man who created that whole hippie art type deal. And here he was living in Jenkins, Missouri. And he had gone back to the land, and he loved this place because it reminded him of the old Vanguard and some of these old folk clubs and stuff. And that's the way I ran it. I pretty much ran it as a folk. And what we did, we got a stage. We found a stage. It was an old part of a barn, and Jim Day found it. We went and got a truck and hauled it, and it was about the big as those two tables together, and we took some bricks and set it up on the bricks, and I got some old egg cartons and put it on the wall, and next thing I know, everybody's adding to it, and it became Fernando's. And I had everybody from John Hartford to the Guyer Street Sheiks to Buck Trent would come in and play. Andy's backup band would come in and do jazz and stuff, and it was just a remarkable, lot of fun place. But they took that away from me. And I said, okay. So I got into Tex and the Roadies, and Tex and the Roadies became a pretty good band, and we started traveling and playing. The next thing you know, we wanted to do an album because I wanted to get a demo of the band to get more gigs. And we did the demo, and it sounded so good. We went, and Bill says, let's take it over and let Michael hear it. Michael Brewer at that time was living in a trailer on Lake Taneycomo. Small, they called him Trailer Mike. Here's a guy who had done 20 gold albums, and he was sitting in a beat-up old trailer. So we gave him the tape. He liked it, and he said, well, let's do it at the studio in Springfield. Lou's the Sequiota Column 4, I don't know what you call it. And, well, Lou sold that. What? I said, and one thing I learned in the business, well, the producer is the guy who makes the decisions. And I hired Mike to do this. And I had met Gary Smith at Digitrax in Branson, and I saw the studio, and I told Mike about that. Well, he had played with Gary at one time, knew Gary, lived with Gary, and I had my producer, I had my engineer with Nashville, Tulsa. He was trained, and we did the album. The album took off, and the band broke up. We got a record deal out of England with Prestige Records, and then the band broke up. So I decided right there I was going to go ahead and get in the business of the music, and I became a publisher, music publisher, and I did 8 albums. And after all that, I've done the albums. The last album I did was such a mind screw thing that I decided that no longer going to help people, I'm going to help myself. And so the last project that I have is called 40 Acres, and it's about growing pot. And the reason we're putting it out is because the country is finally caught up with the song in which I wrote in 1974. And I re-recorded it. I've got the 45 over there that I did at Dean Billingsley's studio when he had out on east of town there. And like I said, I've worked with everybody. Mel Tillis, I worked with Mel, Andy Williams, I worked with Jennifer in the Morning. I've worked with all the major artists. I feel very blessed. Always the bridesmaid, never the bride. But I feel blessed to the fact that I had a chance to experience for the last 40 years. I've learned everything I can about this industry. It never changes. Right now, my biggest battle is piracy. And there's a part, I'll touch real short on this. I started a computer company in 2000 after everything fell apart in computers and Napster, and I developed some software that stops piracy. It works so well that the government is scared to death of it because they can't crack the code. And I still fight that. I could have saved this industry. I'm very disappointed in this industry, especially now that Spotify's been bought by Universal and Warner Brothers. It's almost a monopoly. When a star like Roseanne Cash gets $600 for 600,000 hits, that tells you something's really wrong with the system, and it's really bad. And I don't know if it'll ever change, but thank God for live music. And folks, musicians aren't making any money off their records. The only way they're going to make money is you get off your butt and go see them and start supporting them. This town used to be quite a musical town, and people would go out. Today, the young generation wants to sit home, smoke pot, and watch TV or play games. But you need to get out there and support your local musicians. And that's what I'm all about. I love music. No matter what people tell you, that is my love, my only love. And I hope to die with my guitar in my hand. Thanks. Oh, questions?
Just as a side note, I think, check me if I'm wrong, I think today is Dean Billingsley's birthday. It is.
Oh, all right. Oh, and Woody is a gentleman that I did a song for. When I talked with Woody one day, we were up in his office, and he's showing me songs, who, by the way, is a great writer. I mean, there's another guy they screwed. But he said, here, I got a song for you, and see what you can do with this. And it's called I Love Tits. So I took it down to Gary in Branson when he had his studio down there and got backup singers from Mickey Gilley, got this great drummer. Michael Brewer came in and produced it. If you see on it, it's Tyrone is the name he used, but it's a great song. It really is. It's nothing bad about it. Actually, it's praise for everything that we've done. You know, as Robin, God, what is Robin's last name? No, not Robin, Luke, the comedian. Robin Williams said, you know, we spend nine months trying to get out of there, and the rest of our lives trying to get back in. And that's a praise to women and their beauty and what they give us. So, and that song pretty well says that too. Any other questions?
Remember what it felt like when the utility company shut the power off? We had to make donations for a generator.
Yes, I do. Well, that happened in Phelps Grove too. Yeah. They tried. That was an interesting time. They were trying everything to do to stop us, and they just never stopped us. They couldn't stop us because basically Lake Springfield at that time was under city utilities, and they had a thing called permits. So they just, well, you have to get a permit. So we went and got a permit. You know, same thing with Springfield. Never had any limitations. You could just go and set up and play. I remember at Phelps Grove the time that the cops showed up, and there was like 12 of them standing there with their new helmets and their new sticks, and they're just going, well, what do we do now? Because Teddy Hutchins goes and gets a generator and brings it over to the deal, and we plugged in and started playing. And it was such an easy solution, you know. But you know, God love this town. I mean, it's a place where I learned a lot about the music, not so much the industry, but the music, and people like Bungie and Don and Lloyd. Really something. Any other questions? No more?
Did you go to Bebop's much?
Yes. As much as I could. Especially Zachary Bowe would play, or Granny's. And that was neat because it was all underground. Hey, we're going to Bebop's. And after the close, we'd go out there. And it was great. That's what I'm saying. There was so many places that I went around here that were out in the country and doing that and playing in barns and places like that, and it seemed like everybody had a great time. I don't know if it still goes on, but I know that this generation, we had a blast. We really had a blast. We broke the rules, whatever rules were there, and it didn't seem to bother anybody. That's one thing I do appreciate, people like Mickey and the older gentlemen. It was kind of like, yeah, as long as you don't hurt yourselves or hurt anybody, we'll just about put up with anything and allow you to have your ventures. And I know I probably got a bad rap here and there, but I really don't care. I tried to do everything we did was up above board. Never tried to pull any stunts with anybody or anything like that. It was pretty much Mike. I lived with Mike Maples there and Zachary Bowe. We had a fun for the 3 years we were there on Grand Street. Did a lot of stuff. Played. Bob Philibert, as much as what everybody thinks, he was pretty instrumental in making this town work for the music industry. I mean, anytime you got paid, it was through him. He didn't always pay you the right way, but you know, he did have a lot of gigs, and there was a lot going on in this town for the music. You made a living here playing music. You didn't have to go work another job like I do now, you know, doing maintenance or crap. You pretty much played 4 or 5 nights a week. And if you didn't play here in town, you went somewhere else and played. Kansas City, St. Louis, Columbia, Joplin. Joplin was real big. I remember when Shorty Dunn went there, we played in a place called the Top Hat. You had the Roman Palace, and you had the place over there in Galena, the Ranch, Pittsburgh, Kansas. I mean, there was clubs up there, that big roller rink up there, or whatever it was. Tower Club. Oh yeah, I remember that one. Roadieing for Zachary Bowe. Carry a B3 up that thing. See how you feel. That was quite the deal. But it was a wonderful. That's why when I moved here, I thought, oh my God, where am I at? But thank God I came, because it made me today what I am, because the music was a school. It was a school. You actually learn, and you could take that and go other places. When I went to Dallas and played there, I was a king. I had write-ups and stuff, and I attribute it to learning my craft here and going down there and playing. And people like Bob Green, who've played with all the jazz people. Everybody forgets about Rocky Hellwig and those guys and the Bedells and stuff. And these people, yes, Dallas Barkley, these people made this town what it is. And I'm sorry to say, I wish it was still going on. But that's the way it is. Question?
You mentioned moving from California to Ozark. Was there a reason involved there?
No, and I keep asking my father why, and he keeps giving me these excuses. I heard a few deals was supposedly he knew Zenith was coming. He was working in factories in El Segundo and stuff, and I think the word was, Because when I worked in computers in Dallas, you had a magazine called Computer World, and if you read those, you could pretty well see what was going on. I mean, I worked on the space shuttle. I worked with a company that did the space shuttle. That was really neat to know that I was part of the space, that whole thing, Houston and things like that. So, you know, but I think it was because now my relatives tell me, well, they wanted to save you from California. But I went, nah, no, that ain't it, you know. I said, in fact, when I got here, I got in more trouble here than I did in California, because in California, if you stepped out of line, the cops were at your door. I mean, you went to juvie really fast. There was no messing around. Here, at least the cop goes, okay, Buff would go, I'm taking your beer, now go home. Then he'd invite you over to his house to sit and drink the beer that he took away from you. So that was the kind of thing. So, yeah, that's what it is. Okay.